Hello YouTube. It has been a while. I took quite a long break from the game and an even longer break from making videos, but I'm back. I'm still alive, and I'm hoping to make something a little bit educational, a little bit helpful, especially to my viewers, whoever may be left viewing this channel, that are wishing to improve on Forza Motorsport. So the concept of today's video is basically, inside my mind, how do I come up with a tune from totally scratch, stock settings. How do I arrive at the setup that I arrive at? What is my thought process behind each setting, if there even is one? And yeah, so I'm here to explain that today. So what I've done is I've taken a car that I don't have a tune for yet. I haven't done a lot of racing since they split up GT, and so I used to have an M6, but then they split up the classes and they changed the build, and now my M6 is totally stock, no tune. ESV has a tune, but I don't have a tune on the car. The thing is, I get a lot of comments in my videos asking for tune setups, and I have a problem, and that's I'm in a team, and most of my setups are not even mine, or partially mine, I should say. Some of my own numbers mixed with my teammates' numbers. Basically, the bottom line is, I don't want to be sharing setups that aren't completely mine. I don't think my teammates would totally appreciate that. So that's why I don't do a lot of open source stuff, especially in GT. So I figured a good solution is, why don't I take you into my mind from a completely stock tune and show you guys my thoughts on how to create a good setup. I'm not claiming to be the best tuner. I'm not even the best tuner in my team. I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. Like, I can make a pretty good car, but for myself. But yeah, I hope this video is helpful. Right, so the car I'm going to be using as an example today is the M6 in the GT2 spec. What I've done here is, just to make sure this is stock, I went into a lobby, I reset stock tune settings, so it's on the correct spec build. It has completely stock tune settings, as you'll see. I'll go through them. And we're going to start from here. We're going to do basically just a little test drive lap on stock settings, and I'm going to lay down some basic ground rules that I always start with in my GT tuning. There are certain settings that I almost never deviate from, and we'll start there first. So I'm going to go ahead and start race. And we'll see, this car, it's a stock tune. It's not going to drive great. And I can already tell you the first thing I'm going to change is the aero settings. But for, the sake of example, we're just going to test drive the car completely stock settings. I'll show you the tune right now, actually. I should have probably done that in the pits, but tune car. So stock, we have staggered tire pressures, which isn't always bad, but they're a little high, 31 and 29. Stock gearbox. The stock camber settings are usually pretty high for my liking. A little bit of negative toe, 5 caster. These randomly assigned roll bars that I almost never keep. The springs actually might not be too far off from what I end up running. This sort of range of softness is pretty standard for a tune of mine. Ride height comes slammed. I may raise the front depending, but it'll probably stay at the lowest setting. Bump and rebound. Rebound is quite low. Bump is pretty close stock. Roll center is at 0. Dive and squat, the squat's a little high probably for GT. Aero is smack dab in the middle, front and rear. That's the first thing we're going to change. We'll get to that in a little bit. Brakes, obviously, they start in the middle on the bias and at 100%, which is default pressure. And 62 and 16 diff, not terribly, nothing terribly wrong with that differential. We'll probably want something a little bit more aggressive than that, but we'll also get into that later. So that's where we're starting, and let's see how it goes. Apparently I moved a slider somewhere. We're just going to say yes. Okay, we can't skip lap in free play, so we'll just go from a standing start. So the first thing I do when I get into a car that I'm not familiar with is I go to my telemetry and I try to identify what the power band is. where do I want to be in the RPMs? See, this thing understeers, wow. Where do I want to be in the RPMs to maximize my efficiency? And this is also how I'm going to determine my gear ratios in the end. How close together do I want them to be? So as soon as we get out of the S's, I'll have a better idea, because I'm constantly on and off the power here. It's not a very good place to tell. So we're going to get out of here, and we'll be able to open up the legs here a little bit on this straightaway. So the power starts dropping off. Right at red line, it's about upper 470s. 476-ish at the rev limiter. So I know how far it drops. And if I rev it all the way to red line and I shift, the power comes back in right at that upper 470s mark again, and it's climbing. So that actually tells me that these gear ratios are pretty close to properly spaced out. What you're looking for here is, it's okay if your power starts to drop. We don't want to shift right at peak power. Because if we shift right at 500, you see how when I shifted to 4th gear, the power dropped to like 420. We're not maximizing our horsepower range if we shift right when we hit peak power. 500, and then it just drops so low. Whereas if I ride 4th gear out all the way, dropping down, shift to 5th, see that actually that was even kind of short, but it went down to about 480. When I shifted to 5th, it was in the lower 490s. That's kind of how I like to do my gears. You want to, let's say the power drops to 480. When I shift to the next gear, I want it to start at 480 and climb. That's the goal. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'm just saying that's the first thing I look at when I get into a car. I'm trying to identify the power band. If you can make the most efficient use of your gears, you're already ahead of so many people on the track. And, you know, people will just throw willy-nilly gears at things to what they think feels good, but I like to use the horsepower data because any little bit of straight line pull is very important. But anyways, I'll tell you where I start. In most of my GT cars, my tire pressures are going to fall anywhere between 27.5 and 29.5. Most of the time I start right at 28. I'll say 90% of my GT cars are just at 28. It's a very brain dead number. You don't really have to think about it a lot. I believe, I don't want to leak too much about my teammates' tunes, but I know that we have a Ferrari that has like 29 or 29.5 pressures. Simply because I think the reasoning behind that is due to tire wear. The Ferrari has really bad tire wear issues, and I think a slightly higher pressure will kind of remedy bad tire wear, but it could lead to less grip in other situations. But 28 seems to be a good balance for me in GT, so that's usually where I keep it. Now, let's say you want to make some very minor adjustments in understeer and oversteer balance. If you raise your front tire pressure or lower your rear tire pressure, basically if you have the front higher than the rear, that's going to induce a natural understeer bias, and the opposite is true if you have the rear higher than the front. That's going to cause a little bit more rotation or oversteer. So you can play around with that a little bit. I usually don't vary more than 1.0 or even 0.5, and in this case I'm probably just going to keep them the same. But anyways, gearing. Now, gearing's so important, such an underrated tuning tab here just to extract time. Something that a lot of the top players and more like experienced tuners have figured out in this game is that 610, for whatever reason, 610 final drive is just the best setting to run. It seems to react better over bumps and rev limiter, like accidental rev limiter hitting, is the best way I can explain it. So you might have experienced this where, say, you are near the top of a gear and you run over a curb or you hit a bump and your RPMs suddenly spike and it touches the rev limiter and your car gets stuck on the rev limiter, and it won't come off of it for a little while and it slows you down a little bit. Well, it seems like with 610 that effect is minimized. So that's pretty much where everybody seems to rock it. Some people also claim faster shift times. 610, I don't know how founded that is, but basically that is why I rock 610. You can achieve the same gear ratios with almost any number in this range. so long as you individually adjust first through sixth, but I like to keep the final drive at 610. That'll mean my first gear number is going to be very low because obviously we don't want a 34 mile an hour first gear. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and move this number down. Now, this is very car dependent for me. Do I want my first gear to be strictly a launch gear, or do I want my first gear to be usable in hairpins? I would say for most of my GT cars, I like to have first gear as my launch gear and second gear as my gear that's dedicated for hairpins. Just because they can be a little slippery at low RPM, and in general, first gear is a little bit more unstable than second gear, just with the way it interacts with the differential in this game. Long story short, first gear, you're going to experience a little bit more slip than if you had the same gear ratio, but second gear. So I like to have first strictly as a launch gear, and then mid-track, mid-race, very slow corners, second gear is my bread and butter. So with that being said, I also have to explain these numbers here under the shift speed column. They are not entirely accurate at all, which is quite annoying when it comes to tuning, but I have a trick to solve that. Because those numbers in the shift speed column are not accurate, but move your sixth gear so that it matches your first gear. All of a sudden you only have one gear, right? But now you see your true top speed on the left in the benchmark column over there. So far it's actually accurate. I'm actually surprised, but we're going to move first gear up to, I like my launch gear to be around 60. I think that's a sweet spot. You don't want your launch gear to be too short because then you're just going to light up the tires off the line. And you don't want it to be too long because then you'll just bog and everybody will pass you. So in my experience, 60 is a good spot for first gear, you know, for like a good 3/4 throttle or higher launch. It works pretty well. And I like my second gear, my hairpin gear, to be around like 85. So let's see. I'll go to 85 on the shift speed column and see where it puts me. Wow, actually, well, this is the first time I've ran into this where it's actually accurate. So, okay, yeah, 85. So we'll go with that for now. And I want to sort of evenly space out these gears all the way until about... I want my top speed to display as 180. I'm probably not going to see 180 in most cases in this car, but you want a little bit of breathing room. You don't want, let's say you're on Hakone and you hit 175 in sixth gear. You don't want your top speed to be capped out at sixth gear because then you're basically chilling out at less than peak power next to the rev limiter. And also if you're in the draft, you could top out by accident. So you want a little bit of breathing room on your top speed. So I'm going to go ahead and mostly evenly space this out. I do this, I'm largely looking at the gear graph when I do this, and I'll make some adjustments at the end here. I'm just going to evenly space them out and then see kind of where it lands my top speed. 177, okay, so we're going to extend this. See, right, okay. So I'm at the point now where if I move this to 59, it increases to 176. If I move to 58, 177. And then the numbers stop increasing so much. This is when it's less gearing limited and more drag limited, so you have to be careful when you move your final gear this high because you could accidentally make it like way too long. So I'm gonna chill right around 178.7. That sounds good. I don't think the M6 has a very good top speed, like in the broad spectrum of GT2 cars. I think it has really good acceleration though, so it sort of makes up for it. But setting my sixth gear, I'm going to readjust my fifth through third. Since I've already set my first gear as my launch gear, my second gear is my hairpin gear, I'm going to sort of just evenly space out these gears. And that to me looks good. We'll look at that later in telemetry and we can make changes if we need to. See if it matches up with corners properly. Like, there's still adjustments we can make from here. But that's going to be my base. And with those changes, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm going to do a little bit more driving, and we'll see how that works out. So where's my second gear top out? Yep. Okay. Let's look at the telemetry. This third gear is really nice. It's right in the middle. Right in the middle of the power band in these S's. It's okay if it drops a little bit. Yeah, that's nice. Do we want second or third for this? Third. Definitely third. Yeah, this is nice. I have a feeling we're not going to be making many adjustments from here. We just have to identify our shift point now. So it's looking like we want to shift right around when the power drops to, oh... Ooh, fifth gear is short. Hang on. Might need to extend our gears here a little bit in the upper range. Second through fourth felt pretty good, but fifth is a little short there. 485, jumps back in at 485 and climbing, so that looked good. Now this one, if you notice, when I was in fourth gear and my power dropped to 485, I shift, it's already at 500. That means that fifth gear is a little bit too short. When I shift into fifth gear, the RPM is too high, and I'm not maximizing my power band in that case. So, because of that, actually you can kind of see on the gear graph, my fifth gear relative to the other gear ratios is a little short. So I'm just going to extend that like 2 clicks, and I'm going to take my sixth gear up another 2 clicks. Let's see how that does. So I'll be able to test it on this straightaway coming up here. Second gear. That's a nice gear ratio for chicane exit on this track. So what RPM is 485? About 7,500. That's a really easy shift point to remember. That's a lot closer. I like that. So I shift at 485, and it kicks back in like the upper 480s. That's not the end of the world. That's pretty close to maximizing my power band. I can take that. That's fine. So as far as that goes, I think we've identified our shift point as 7,500. That being the point where my power drops to 485, and when I shift, it resumes at 485 and climbing. That's the perfect shift point. So 7,500, that's exactly red line if I look at my tachometer. So now I know, without being in telemetry, I just have to shift at red line, and I know I'm maximizing my power band every time I shift. So far so good. I'm liking where that's going. It still feels very understeery, but we're going to fix that here in a second. So, moving on to alignment. Okay. Now, guys, I have to be honest with you. I'm not like I'm not a tuning wizard. You know, I know how to make effective setups for me, but I'm not always like super sciencey when it comes to settings and what exactly they do. I know what numbers work in this game for me, and I look at other top player setups, and they usually end up around the same range. So what I will say in that note is 2.0 and 1.5 on the negative. That's a very high camber setting for this game, especially in GT. We're going to back that down. I would say a good base, just 1.5, 1.0. And usually from here, I'll keep that as my base, right? From here, if I want more mid-corner oversteer, I might increase these by 1 or 2 clicks. If I think the rear of the car is very unstable, especially on like longer corner exits, the car starts to slide a little bit, I'll decrease my rear camber. If I think the front just has too much grip relative to the rear, decrease front camber. But for now, I'm just going to keep 1.5, 1.0. That's my base. I don't know if I'll deviate from that or not. We'll see in the future. And also toe. So negative 0.1 toe, interesting as a base. It's not like that's terrible, but one thing you'll notice with toe is that little adjustments will go a long way. So you'll feel 0.1 degrees. And what toe does essentially, in simplified terms, again, you know, I'm not like a tuning god or whatever, but say you add 0.1 front toe. That's going to make your turn in a lot sharper. It's going to feel a little bit more twitchy. And that can be good, but in GT, in cars that are already kind of twitchy, especially in like fast transition scenarios, I tend to stay away from that. My front toe is almost always zero point 0 on GT cars. Rear toe is something I play around with a lot more than front toe. Say you add zero point 0.1 degrees of rear toe. That is going to make it so that in your mid corner, like kind of like mid to late corner to when you're getting on the throttle, you're gonna feel more rotation. It's hard to explain. Like say you're on a very long corner, like something like Grand Oak or Mugello or whatever, and you're getting on the throttle pretty early on a long high speed exit. I think adding rear toe can help the car point around faster, which in some cases can be good. In some cases, it can really bite you in the butt because it'll cause you to scrub a little bit or like get a little slide and you'll lose corner speed. So be careful with toe. A little goes a long way is the way I look at toe. Also, inversely, if you want something more stable, you can go negative in the rear. This will make the rear more planted on throttle. I see a lot of people, if they're having trouble with certain cars, they'll just do like negative 0.1 in the rear. And that's what the car came with stock, and that's fine. But that will keep the car more stable. And if you want less like super twitchy turn-in, you can go, 1 or 2 clicks negative in the front. Same thing. Whoops. And one thing you'll also notice, for some reason these cars stock, they'll come like misaligned at the center here. It's like negative 0.0 and positive 0.0. It's not like a true zero. So I almost consider this negative 0.05 and this positive 0.05. A little trick you can do if you want to truly zero out this value, just take it all the way to 5.0 and then take it back to center. Oh wow, I didn't even have to go that far. It just zero. Well, anyways, the basic gist of it is if you go all the way over here and then you come back, it'll give you a true zero. Which I'm not even sure if I wanted that, to be honest. I'm I'm more of an aggressive driving style type of guy, so really this slightly above center rear toe setting might be good for me. And if I want to dial it back in the future, I can always like put this to true zero. Caster, oh man, caster is one of those mystery settings for me. Oh, let me change this too before I forget. Caster, and I wish I could provide better info about this, but the reality is with my setups is this is the only setting I run. It's I don't even know how to explain it. Whenever I lower this, the car just feels weird. It feels like it doesn't turn correctly. It's very hard for me to explain, especially in GT. Maybe like down to like 6.5, but I just always run 7 and I tune around that personally. One thing that I do know that I've heard people say in tuning circles or whatever is when you run a higher caster, you don't need as much camber, which is probably why I like a lower camber setting, is because I always run a 7 caster setting, right? So I'm assuming that if you ran like a 5 caster instead, like this would be closer to what I'm running, like 15117. But this is just what I prefer, and this is what I always have it at. I'm just gonna leave it at that. I really don't know exactly what caster does. I just know that when I lower it, I don't like how the car feels. And there's gonna be more settings like that, guys, where you know what, I can make an effective setup for me, but I can't always tell you why. Now, with that being said, I'll drive it a little bit after making those changes with the alignment. It's probably not going to feel much different though. Alignment is one of those very fine tuning sort of tuning tabs. It's not going to totally make or break your tune. It can improve it. That second gear is so nice right there. It's not, there's no tire spin, but it's not so low in the RPM that it's bogging. It's very manageable out of there. But yeah, the bottom line is the car is still understeering, and that's because of the aero setting and the roll bars and yada yada. So, oh wow, I'm in the. Oh wow, well that could be a problem right there. I was tuning on mediums. That's fine. Everything I've covered so far is going to be relatively the same, whether I was on softs or mediums. You guys trust me. But I like how softs feel better. So yeah, we're gonna stick with that. Oh, also let's change the wear rate so I don't kill my tires. Okay, tuning. Roll bars. Now, this is one that varies highly amongst different tunes that you're going to see. Say you're in a Discord with open source tunes being posted or whatever, you're going to see everybody's roll bars all over the place. I'm just going to tell you what I like, how to adjust it, and you guys can go from there. So, bass, my bass always is 40-40. Stiff roll bars, front and rear, always my bass. There's just something about it that makes the car feel so good. Now, does it always stay here? Absolutely not. I have GT cars that are 40 and 30. 40 and 1. 38. I have one that's 38 and 15. And I think what happens here for me is I like 40-40 so much because I'll tune the rest of it around the roll bars being so stiff, if that makes sense. But still, roll bars can absolutely make or break how your car feels, especially on corner exit. And I think I like stiff roll bars so much because it keeps the car more planted on corner exit. It doesn't feel like it wanders as much, so to say. But we're going to keep it on 40-40 for now. And the way the adjustment works on roll bars is, in very simplified terms, just in general, higher front, more understeer. So 40 and 20, your car is going to push more, it's going to understeer more, it's going to be more stable, it's going to be easier to get on the gas, but it might not turn as much as you want it to. Higher rear, say you have 20 and 40, more oversteer, more rotation. It might be harder to get on the gas. This also all depends on the car. Some cars have such natural understeer that you have to put this setting on, or it won't drive correctly. Some cars have so much natural oversteer that you need to do 40 and 1, or it's just not going to do what you want it to do. And then there's a whole bunch of cars that land somewhere in the middle. So what I want you to take away from this is higher front, more understeer, higher rear, more oversteer. And you also have just general stiffness and general softness, like on a scale. Now, something like, if both your roll bars are really high, your car is going to generally feel more stiff. It may not affect, like, rotation-wise, like the way your car understeers or oversteers. That mostly has to do with a difference in the roll bars, but I'm talking in general, like how far or up or down both of these are on the scale is going to affect how stiff or soft your car feels overall. So I find 40-40 cars sometimes can have trouble over bumps or curbs or whatever because they're so stiff. But also rarely an issue for me, really, if I'm being honest. I'd rather, if I want my car to have a neutral roll bar setup, I'd rather have 40-40 than 1 and 1. It just feels better to me. That's the bottom line, just for me, personally. So we're going to start with 40-40 on the base here. I believe the stock setting was like 22 and 16. I might be wrong, but it was a slightly understeer bias setup, I believe. So let's see how this goes. Really liking the gear ratios. I'm gonna have to see how 6 gear feels on a longer track. The car already feels a little bit better. It feels less sway, and I think that's because of the overall stiffness of the roll bars, and it feels less understeery because the front is no longer higher than the rear, which to me is a win. Now, Here's the kicker, though. If we change other things in the tune, that can completely throw off how we view our roll bars. So, again, just because we put this as our base now doesn't mean we're not going to change it later. So, springs. Now, the way I like to look at these two settings in relation to each other is roll bars are something that I feel more so in late mid corner to corner exit. More so. They affect your car at all parts of the turn, but that's where I feel those adjustments the most. Springs, same thing. They can affect your car in all parts of the corner. They do, but I feel them more so in corner entry to like early mid corner sort of deal. Can you still use springs to tune for corner exit? Yes, but that is where I mostly feel them. So basically, if I want my car, well, okay. First let's start with just overall softness or stiffness. If your car right now they're pretty soft. Let's say you move your springs way up here, like 900 on both, which is pretty stiff. Your car is going to be more responsive. It's going, yeah, basically just more responsive overall. Um, it's going to turn in a little bit quicker, but it's going to be more unstable. It's going to struggle over curbs more. It's going to want a trampoline off the curbs. One instance where stiffer overall springs can be useful is when you're dealing with portions of tracks with really high compressions, like say Spa. After turn one, you're coming up to a Rouge Radion. You hit that really sharp compression before you turn in going up the hill. If your spring rates are too soft, your car will basically bottom out and you'll lose grip. So having high spring rates on Spa can really help you get through a Rouge and Radion better because you're not bottoming out the spring. So that's one way where stiff springs can really help you out. Overall, though, I like to have more of a medium soft spring rate. I think it transfers the most well across all the tracks you'll encounter in hoppers. Basically, it's like the most balanced like stiffness setting I've come across. So somewhere in like the 450 to 600 range on most cars. And these springs, honestly, like stiffness wise, are very close to what I would just run, anyways. In GT, I will say most of the time I run a slightly higher front spring. We'll get more into why this is in a little bit, but basically, when you have a higher front spring, your car is going to be more stable on turn in and like entering the turn. It's not going to feel like it wants to like instantly let go. It's going to allow you to settle into the corner easier. It might not rotate as much as something that's stiffer in the rear. But when it comes to GT, I like having that initial stability that allows me to get settled into the corner, and then, I can figure it out from there. But this also depends on the weight distribution of your car, the overall like natural characteristics of your car. There's a lot that goes into it. So say you have a car that's naturally super understeery, you might want a higher rear spring, because if your car is just not diving into the corner, like you cannot get the car turned into the corner, you might want to do this. It's totally possible. Now, is the M6 that kind of car? I doubt it. It's front engine, rear wheel drive. The aero setup that we run is going to result in probably natural oversteer. So that's kind of where I'm going to keep it, is a stiffer front spring. How much stiffer? Well, that's all relative. We can start with a base, of course, and just take a guess at it, but we'll have to change it from there. I usually like to work in increments of like 25. So in this case, I'm just going to do a 50 stiffer in the front. I'm going to keep it there. Ride height, almost always keep it lowest. However, there are cases where this can change. Raising front ride height can help stabilize your car on corner entry. It's kind of like a shortcut to corner like kind of, if you don't want to use toe because toe can increase tire wear, if you don't want to use a negative toe to slow down your turn in, you can just up the ride height a little bit and it will slow down the turn in on your car. Obviously, this will affect your mid-corner speed. It'll make you a little bit slower in sweepers, but it can make the car a lot easier to drive. Just bumping up the front ride height a little bit can go a long way on like how your car turns into sweepers. Like, say you're on a track like Mugello and you cannot stop sliding every time you enter a corner. You just raise your front ride height a little bit. I'm sure it will help. You'll notice it. So that's something I use a lot. Rear ride height, I almost never raise. The only time I'll raise rear ride height is in conjunction with front. Let's say I'm having trouble over a certain track. Oh, like, I don't know, Road Atlanta. You know, the curbs are just absolute death traps. Every time you run over them, you bottom out, your car's doing silly stuff. You can raise the ride height and it will take the curbs easier. Will it be, not as ideal on other tracks? Yeah. But if you're really having trouble at a certain spot and you're feeling like you can't take bumps or curbs, and you might want to look at raising your overall ride height. Raising the rear will induce more oversteer. It's not often I do it in this way. I think there are other ways to tune in oversteer that are more effective. I have done it before on very niche cars, not in GT. I usually leave that slammed in GT. So, again, we're going to go back and see how our spring adjustment has changed. I really, probably, this is only going to make the car feel more understeery. It was neutral, and I moved it to a stiffer front. So, I know I've been saying that the car's been understeering. So you would think, Griffin, why didn't you change your springs to be stiffer in the rear? Well, it's because I have an idea of how this tune is going to end up. And this is my best educated guess where the springs are going to end up, because we're going to take all the downforce off the rear of this car, and it's going to drastically change how it drives. It's going to make it more oversteery. So I'm kind of preparing my springs in advance for that downforce change. Now, here is the mystery tab. You thought I was clueless about caster. Well, damping. Welcome. Tell you what I do with damping is bumps to 3 and 4, or 3 to 4, somewhere between there, 3 to 4. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower. And rebound to 11 to 12-ish. And I pray. Not really. It's more of like, this is an experience thing for me. Do I ever fine-tune damping? Almost never, because I don't know what it does. It overall affects your car's performance over curbs. It can overall affect your car's behavior on turn-in and corner exit. But the thing is with damping in this game is I really do not feel much of what it does, even in large adjustments. I think, personally, the overall softness or stiffness of these settings is more important than the balance of the settings. Now, does it make a difference? I'm sure. Is there someone who could probably explain it better than me? Absolutely. This is almost always where I end up. I think, with tuning settings in general, a good philosophy to have is, stiffer rear, more oversteer, stiffer front, more understeer. So you can absolutely use that mindset when you approach damping if you really want to try and fine tune it. I think it works like that too, but I'm just going to keep them neutral for now. I'm just going to pick 3.5 and 11.3. And I'm only telling you guys this because this is what I always do. When I run the times I run, I have the pace that I have with going into damping with this mindset. So I'm not trying to, deceive anybody. This is what I do, and this is what a lot of people I know do. Because really, when it comes down to it, suspension geometry is a lot more noticeable than this, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinion. How did I arrive at 3 to 4 and 11 to 12? Through experience over 10 years of playing this game. It seems like in every Forza the values are pretty similar. You want a low bump and a high rebound. That's just how the car reacts the best over the bumps and feels the most stable. So that is Obviously, there are exceptions in like super high downforce prototypes, F1, all that crap. You might even see these settings reversed, but in these kinds of cars, this is pretty standard stuff. So I'm not even going to waste your time test driving on that. Now, here's an interesting one. This is a new tuning tab in this game. Um, Something that a lot of people kind of were very confused about when the game came out, but I think people are starting to figure it out now. Suspension geometry. The roll center height offset. It's kind of a confusing name, and it's really easy to overthink this setting. The easiest way to think about roll center height offset is secondary roll bar tuning. That's literally it. I can set my roll bars to 40/40 and then adjust my rotation needs. Say I want my car to rotate a little bit more, I can just adjust it through roll center height offset. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Say I want, and I will say the overall stiffness of this, I usually run it pretty high. That's just what feels best to me. Low, the car, when you have a really low roll center height offset, it feels like it has a lot of body roll, and the sort of range of motion is too high in your suspension. That's what it feels like to me. So I generally run it pretty stiff. And I'll start at 9898, and I'll just go from there. If I want more oversteer, do something like that. Just lower it. If I want more understeer, if the car is unbearably oversteering and I can't stop sliding, just do that. Like, this is something to play around with. Stiffer front, more understeer. Stiffer rear, more oversteer. Again, the same theme is popping up with a lot of these settings. So I'll start at 9898. I'm sure we'll change it. Now, anti-geometry percent. You have anti-dive and anti-squat. This actually, when you think about it, it's pretty self-explanatory. Anti-dive is mostly braking and corner entry. So think about when you hit the brakes. The car wants to dive down in the front. If you up anti-dive, it's resisting that downward front movement when you brake. So if you want your car to stay more flat while you're braking, you would increase this. Now the effect of this is more stability under braking. If you find that the car gets very light, or it's inconsistent on corner entry while braking, it may be a good idea for you to raise this, because it's going to keep more weight on the rear tires because the front isn't dipping as much. Now think about it the opposite way. If you decrease your anti-dive all the way to like negative 50, which I don't think you would ever do in most cases, when you hit the brakes, your car is gonna do a friggin' nose stand. It's not really, but it's gonna dip very far very quickly towards the front. And what that's going to do is it's going to take weight off the rear tires quickly, and it's going to make it feel very unstable when you're entering a corner on the brakes. So this is one of your adjustments when it comes to corner entry while braking. One of your adjustments, and it often is a very effective one. In GT, I usually run it positive. Like I said, I like to have these cars more stable on corner entry. So I'll run something, I don't know, positive 25 to positive 50. We'll start at positive 30. Like, we're just throwing numbers out there. Anti-squat. Think of what I just told you about the front, but for the rear. This is mostly on corner exit in rear-wheel drive. So obviously, exiting a corner, the weight is going to want to shift to the rear, and your anti-squat is going to affect like how far and how quickly that weight is shifted to the rear. So if you have a very low anti-squat, it means there's going to be very low resistance to the car shifting the weight to the back. It means the car is going to be very stable on throttle, especially like at low speed or while turning. You're going to put all that weight on the rear. You're going to take the weight off the front tires, which is going to induce understeer, which may not always be a bad thing. This could be a very useful tool to like get better corner exit. So oftentimes in GT, I'll run this all the way down to -50. That's not uncommon for me at all. If you want your car to rotate more on throttle or just not understeer as much on throttle, just raise it. I usually keep it negative. You can put it positive if you want. This is all a feel thing, but I'm just telling you what it does so that you can adjust this to yourself to your liking. I am going to set it at -50. That's what I have most of my cars at in GT. So I'm going to apply that and see how it feels. Now, again, it might feel more understeery after these changes because I haven't changed my aero yet. That's going to be next. The car feels pretty good though already. I'm kind of worried about it. It's probably going to oversteer as soon as I take the rear downforce off. Yeah, feels pretty good. Okay. So, back to the tuning. So we just did sus geo. That's short, I guess, for suspension geometry. Aero. So this is one of my ground rules for GT. Always, and I mean, well, always is a strong word. 99% of the time, it's going to be this and this. No matter what the numbers are here, this is GT meta tuning in Forza Motorsport. It is max front, min, rear. That is the wave right now, and probably forever in this game. It's how it was on Forza 7. It's how it is on this game. It's just, for some reason, this basically gives you the most aggressive turning setup in your aero that you can get, and you can tune the rest of this to have high enough mechanical grip and stability that this works. You can tune the rest of this so that your car is still stable in mid-corner even though it has max front and no rear downforce. What that allows is really good straight line speed and handling all at the same time, just because you can do this without losing the rear of your car. So in simplified terms, what aero does is more downforce means more force is pushing down on that portion of your car. So front downforce, more air pushing down on the front of your car, putting more weight on your front tires, giving you more front grip. More front grip is, in general, oversteer. So more front downforce is going to be tuning more towards oversteer. Rear downforce. Say you have a bunch of rear downforce pushing down on that rear wing, putting all that weight down on your rear tires. That's going to give you more rear end stability, but it's going to cause understeer. So more rear downforce, more understeer. Now, let's say you go min front downforce. That's going to be more understeer because you're taking weight off of the front tires. And min rear downforce is going to be more oversteer because you're taking weight off of the rear tires. So what we have here is maximum oversteer in both directions. We have the most weight possible on the front tires and the least weight possible on the rear tires. And in most cars in this game, this would be a recipe for 180 spins and death. But in GT, this is the way. I don't know why, but that is how the physics work in this game. This is the way to go. So this is my GT ground rule. I am almost never going to change it from this position. The only time I could see this changing is, say you're on Le Mans. You can do this just for pure speed, because aside from corner balance, understeer and oversteer, downforce also has an overall effect on your speed. So less downforce, your car is more slippery, more speed. More downforce, car is producing more drag. It corners better, but it has less top speed. So if you're on Le Mans or a Daytona or a track that demands a lot of speed, you can take down your front aero and probably adjust the rest of your tune to oversteer a little bit more, and you can be good. But that's the only time I think I'd ever change that, and usually I just keep it here anyway. So now I'm really curious to see how the car drives, since that's such a drastic change from the aero on a stock tune was just straight up in the middle on both front and rear. So we'll see how it changes. Now, if if I could skip lap, I would, because we're not going to really see too much of how it changes until we get to the first section of Suzuka and S's. We might feel it here in Spoon. Yeah, the car is pointing the front end more, it's oversteering more, but it's still stable because of the way I've set the rest of my tune. It feels good through Spoon, actually. It feels very good. Wow, yeah, that actually feels really nice so far through 130R. A little early on the brakes. As you can see, too busy talking, almost drove off the track. But my max front and mid rear aero, the car is still holding very stable. That's why it's so powerful in GT. You're getting all that top speed from no rear downforce, but you're getting all the grip from all the front downforce. It really is broken. This feels great, actually. I'm really happy with how this feels right now. See, I can feel it slipping a little bit more, but it's good though. The rotation is good. That's what's letting me get on the throttle earlier, because my front end is pointing earlier. Like, oh my gosh, it's just turning so much more. I'm cutting the track. Yeah, so as you can see, Aero, very powerful tool. Pretty much everybody is going to be rocking that Aero setup that knows what they're doing in GT. I'll say that. And most of your, highly rated downloaded tunes are going to have this. Okay, now braking. This is definitely an important one, and I've been kind of not liking how the brakes have been feeling since I've started doing this. First off, braking balance. This is going to determine like how much of the braking force is applied to the front or the rear of the car. If you have more force being applied to the front brakes, when you hit the brakes and you try to turn, you're going to feel more understeer, but it's going to be more stable. So let's say you have a car that when you hit the brakes and you try to turn into a corner, it just slides, and you can't. It feels very unstable, and it's very frustrating. I hate when cars feel like that. You can back this out to the front. It's not very often I do that, but it's not unheard of at all. There's a few cars I do this with, front brake bias, if they're very unstable under braking. And I'll do this a lot in mid-engine cars in particular. Mid-engine cars aren't very friendly to me, especially on the brakes. I'll do this sometimes, and it'll make me feel better. Now, in front-engine cars and most GT cars in general, I'm going to do a rear bias. This is going to allow the car to rotate more on the brakes. You're going to have a little bit of like a slip angle, like a little bit of rotation on the brakes as you enter the corner, especially trail braking, which is a whole another concept that could be covered in another video. But, as you're approaching a slower corner and you're, still on the brakes, that rear bias is going to help point the nose quicker and more than if you had a front bias. Now, how much each way should you go is the main question here. A good base, just start at like 47. It's a small adjustment, but it's enough to notice from 50 for sure. And if you want more rotation, if your car's still understeering on the brakes, you can go down to like 44. Or I have in the past sometimes gone below 40. It's kind of rare. 44 is like a pretty aggressive setting, but I use it fairly often. 47 is like my base. Same with like going front. You only want to move it like a few percent at a time. It'll go a long way. You'll notice it. Braking force. Now, default is 100%. This is largely a preference thing, but I think there's also some factor of like, I don't like when people say this is only a preference, because I think it actually matters with what kind of car you're in and what kind of track you're driving on. Say you're on a track that is largely momentum based. It's all about holding speed, long corners. You're not hitting the brakes very often, and when you do, you're light on the brakes. Think Maple Valley, think Hakone, think anything with like really like Grand Oak, long sweeping corners like that. Some people, they only run 200% on their tunes because they're like, oh, it's all preference. That's what my finger is used to. Well, when you're on a track like that where you're trying to hold speed and you have 200% pressure, when you try to hit the brakes lightly, it's 200% is going to hit the brakes very hard with very minimal pressing on the brake trigger or pedal, whatever, if you're on a wheel. So what pressure does basically is if you raise it, it's going to make the brakes more sensitive to your input. So me pressing the brake at 50% at this pressure is going to stop my car like somewhere in the middle, like moderately. Me pressing the brakes 50% on this pressure, I'm going to feel like I'm slamming on the brakes and I'm about to lock up. That's the difference. So, if you're tuning a car for a specific purpose, like holding a lot of corner speed, you might not want to go up super high and aggressive on your pressure because you might bleed off too much speed accidentally. You might shift the front suspension too quickly and throw off the balance of the car into a fast corner and scrub speed. Like there's like actual thought that needs to go into the pressure rather than, oh, I like this pressure on it feels good on my finger or my foot. That's what I'm used to. So again, now I'm tuning for GT hoppers here, so you got to think like I'm trying to tune for across like a wide range of tracks. Like what is the most versatile setting that I can come up with here? Yeah, like 140 to 150 is usually what I end up with. I'll go with like 145, sure. It's aggressive enough that if I need to brake in a straight line or like brake to a hairpin, like brake fast, it provides that response. But it's also not like 200% where like I can't modulate the brakes very well if I need to be light on the brakes. So it's that nice in between. This is what I like. Definitely feel free to play around with your pressure according to what you like. It is largely a preference, but there is some thought that needs to go into it too when you're thinking about what kind of car you're driving. The M6 is a total all-around car. I'll drive it anywhere, so yeah, somewhere in the middle will work pretty well for me in this case. So I just want to see what the brakes feel like, especially going in this hairpin actually. Yeah, that already feels better. I just stopped way faster than I did before. I might shorten second gear a little bit. A little bit. Man, yeah, this feels very nice. Which makes sense, because the only adjustment we have left is the diff. And this is one of those cases where I don't even know if I'm going to go back and adjust much of my tune after it's all said and done. And once you get used to this process and like knowing what all the tabs do and knowing your regular like number ranges, this process can be like 2 minutes. I can crank out a tune in like 2 minutes, and it usually feels pretty good with minimal adjustment, just because of repetition and just knowing what I'm looking for. So yeah, it feels good. I like the brakes. And the last setting we have to look at here is the differential. I think a lot of people get confused with this one, and there is a lot to it. I'm trying to dumb down a lot of this. Not only, for my audience, it's not that I think you're all dumb, but it makes for a better video and easier to digest content. But I'm no genius. I don't know. Like I just know like what each like moving it up and down does to my car and what I like, and that's how I'm going to explain it. So you have on a two-wheel drive differential. So if your car is front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive, you will have one acceleration setting and one deceleration setting. Your very simple terms when it comes to rear-wheel drive. I'm speaking rear-wheel drive specific here because that's like almost all the GT cars. Your acceleration is going to affect your car on throttle. So a higher acceleration, your car is going to have more on throttle oversteer. So when you get on the gas, the car is going to want to rotate or slide more, which can be useful, but also can be detrimental. So a lower acceleration will make it so that your rear tires are less prone to spinning up less overall oversteer, more stability on the gas and corner exit. Now, you don't want it too low because then you get on throttle understeer and you're not maximizing your corner exits because your differential is too low. So it's good to play with this. This is a tune setting that I'll play with a lot actually. Is your differential. So I'd say 100 is very high. I'll run 100 in some cars, but not in GT. I don't know of a GT car that I have at 100, to be honest. I have a lot of cars that are around like 40 to 60 in the XL range. Just trying to maximize that rear grip. It's a very safe setting, 40 to 60. You're getting higher than that, and you're starting to spin, especially with really low rear downforce. So I think what was stock, like 60, 62? I'll start at... The thing is, though, 62 like didn't feel bad at all. So it's hard to like justify a change here, but just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to change it to like 30, and just to see how it feels. And then your deceleration. This is going to affect your off-throttle behavior. So say you enter a corner, or you're entering a corner, and you want more oversteer. You would lower your deceleration. Lower deceleration, higher amounts of oversteer. Now, if your car is sliding too much mid-corner, you need to stabilize it. Think Porsches, mid-engine cars, Ferraris, things like that. Things that can be very unstable on corner entry, things that want to kill you when you turn in. Raise this up. It will help. I'm telling you. Between this and the other tuning tools I've given you with your front spring rate, your brake bias, roll center, all this in conjunction can, you'll see it compound on top of each other if you really need to make some adjustments. The M6 seems to be like a very standard car. I'm not going to have to adjust much at all on this tune to get it like how I want it. If I was tuning like a Porsche, I would be going back and forth on this, like raising and lower my decel, changing my brakes, changing my roll centers, changing, my springs. Maybe adding some front ride height. Maybe lowering the rear roll bar. Just anything to get it more like comfortable for me to drive while also remaining fast and not feeling like a brick. That's the whole point of this process. But front engine, rear wheel drive, GT car. You usually run a pretty low decel because they're usually very stable on corner entry. So you're not gonna want it up here. Your car's gonna feel like a brick when you turn into the corner. It's not gonna feel good. You're gonna want it lower, like 0 to 10. I'll start at 5, and we'll go from there. A little bit of oversteer. A little bit oversteer. Not that it's bad, but it's there. See, the thing is, on throttle, it feels like really comfortable, almost too comfortable, like I can push it more. So that's giving me a sign that I want to raise my acceleration on my differential, because I'm slamming the throttle and the car feels like it has more to give, like it's not slipping at all. But on the contrary, on my corner entry, I'm noticing a bit of a slide since I lowered my deceleration. So I may want to, kick that up a little bit, because I'm starting to feel a little bit loose on corner entry where I wasn't before. So I'm going to go back actually and adjust this. I'm going to raise my acceleration up to 50. And I'm going to raise my deceleration back up to like 13. Slightly lower than where it was before, but definitely higher than 5. And I guess the first place we'll feel this change significantly is in a spoon curve coming up here at the end of the straight. Yeah, it feels better. Now it almost feels too stable off throttle. But I don't want to make any rash changes yet. I'm going to see how it feels in the first section of the track, because that's where I was feeling the oversteer before. I just want to see how it compares in the same corners. because you know that makes the most sense to compare it directly on the same corners, or else you know you might be getting false data, I guess you could say. So let's make our way down the front stretch, back into the first section of the track. See how it feels. That was purely because I hit the curb. That oversteer, I'm not going to attest that to the tune. Ooh. Feels a little better. That feels really nice, actually. Yeah, that feels nice. This car is... Man, this car is really nice to drive, actually. Ooh, I almost... Yeah, I kind of twitched there a little bit coming out of the corner. Anyways, guys, I really hope this has been helpful. Just... Look, I know I'm not a tuning master, and I'm sorry I couldn't explain some things better than I did, but... I think a lot of people are curious, like... Someone on a top team who has good pace, like... I think a lot of people put a lot of stock into car setup. They'll see, you know, someone do a time, and they'd be like, oh man, like, that tune must be so good, or, oh, hey man, what's your tune, or this and that. And yeah, man, the tune is a factor, for sure. But, to be honest, guys, I can crank out a tune like this in 2 minutes. And, at the end of the day, 90% of what you're looking for is going to come down to your driving. But I want to eliminate any doubt that there's some like crazy secrets when it comes to tuning. You know, there's obviously some like very broken meta things like full front no rear downforce, although I think that's pretty well known at this point. And, you know, maybe some other tuning settings like really hot stiff roll bars or whatever. But yeah, that's about it. This ended up being a pretty long video, but it was fun to make, and I got a good M6 tune out of it. I really like this thing. I mean, this is driving phenomenally. I can just kind of make it go wherever I want it to go. I was thinking about making a video actually on like general driving tips and like how to approach corners. If you made it this far and you like that idea, let me know. I think I could help a lot of people out, and I think I think I have a good way to explain like what I'm thinking as I'm driving, and like why I do certain things in certain corners, and like what to think about when you're approaching a corner. I think that could be helpful to some people. So yeah, let me know if you're interested in that. And yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.